Hey everybody, this is Neil King, and I'm here at Baltimore Comic Con. And this is one of the things I do as a cartoonist. I go and do sketches and sell some books at Comic Cons, and I've been doing the Baltimore Comic Con for many years. I have my book out, as you can see, and I just have a convention sketch list. So one of the typical things is I get a book like this from a man who has gone to artists for what could be many years to get some of these unbelievably beautiful images. Look at some of the stuff that he has in this sketchbook. So he goes around and asks each artist to do a specific thing. Sometimes he'll leave it up to them. But look at these extraordinary images. All varieties of sketches, all types of styles. Look at that beautiful Dr. Strange. Some very, very famous artists and people like myself, not so famous, but they all have their specific styles. And look at him as he's compiled this document, this historical document. I could look at these all day long. You may know some of these artists as you look through all these things. But what I'm going to do is do an image for him. And so I put a board behind the page in this specific sketchbook. And he was asking for a classic Green Lantern. So not the one that's the type where he's all green, the one that we almost all think of. It's that kind of early form one. And it's a great old character, the crazy costume. But as always, as you can see, I get started with my shapes and just lean in to see what kind of the figure I would do for this kind of a thing. I'm already thinking about his cape. He's got a really long cape. I got to figure out which hand he has the actual ring in. As you do these kind of things, sometimes I'll look at them and I have to look for some reference. I have my phone with me and I'll check the costume. But at this early stage, what I'll do is I'll just kind of lay in some of the major parts to it. As always, we just want to make these dramatic as we can. And from what I'm seeing here, I'm just looking at a piece of reference that is showing this incredible costume. It's very colorful, but this is the kind of golden age kind of example of what he would have looked like. I guess he was considered the Justice Society, not the Justice League one. So kind of the old school one. And there are plenty of people who love all the varieties of these characters. So when they come to me and they ask me for specific ones, oftentimes I have to look them up right in front of them. Or I'll take a picture of a picture that they like. They're like, hey, I like this view, or I would like them to be doing this or doing that. But for this one, again, like as my style dictates, I just want to make sure that I have all good shapes and a nice motion. Not worried that much about the proportion at this point, but most of the things that I do in there, I just want the figure to look like they're up to something and get a little power in there as we go through it. So again, this is the first stage of any of the sketches that I would usually do. And I do try as much as I can in the preliminary drawing to make sure that I'm feeling comfortable as I see this image as it goes through. So again, I'm kind of getting in there. At this point, I think I'm going to start getting some detail in with a marker. I'm just using a little micron in there. I bring a few extra when I'm at the actual events compared to when I'm in a studio. So if they die out, markers, don't have the longest life in the world, especially on these different types of paper. This is a cold pressed kind of paper. This sketchbook that I'm doing, you can see it's got a lot of tooth to it, and to put a line with a marker on it can be hard because it just sucks up all of that line. So when I have this kind of non-smooth surface, I just want to try to not have to do too much with this marker. I tend to to focus a little bit more on the brush marker, because that has no problems on a surface like this. It just flows on top. Or this kind of a thing, I'll have to fight with it in sections. And but for most of this, I do feel that that having just this kind of a marker is completely fine. It kind of gets that. I have to have a certain amount of detail, even though for my specific style, everything's pretty loose and gestural. And the more I can get with simple lines and marks that I'm trying to make, the more I like it. So again, I'm just going through so many little things on this costume. I do try to simplify them, but at some point, you got to get in there and get a good, specific kind of a hand, and I'll clean these up. When you're at a convention like this, I'm most probably doing at least 3 sketches per hour. So depending on what they are, I just don't want to get bogged down with too much of the details. So I don't think people are coming to me for highly detailed images. I think they like these kind of powerful images, and that's what I'm trying to give them. So going for a little contrast, even though I'm going fast, the focus for everything that I draw is that I try to find a light source, and I try to, again, start planning on what would make this a dynamic image eventually. So all kinds of musculature, all kind of semi-proportionate, I think. A lot of the superhero images, the sizes of these things, I'll make some of them really super long, or I try to do this one where I think this is a kind of a typical proportion, that you can see. Again, I'm trying not to overdo it with the brush, though. I have to keep referring back and forth to this, especially with this character, what he's actually wearing. This, I think the belt had to be black, so I have to make sure that I get a certain amount of that in there. I'm just kind of laying it in. Everything seems to be going pretty well. And again, when I have pencils that are this loose, I have to be confident. I have to just go with how this is feeling as a drawing. This is not a super finished image. This is a sketch, and that's the way I like to do them. When I do my own comics, I do things in a much more detailed way. And I think, again, when you see these kinds of things, from me at least, you're going to get how I feel with that character. So I want to make sure that even with this slight indications of this cape that he has back there, I'm just trying to get that contrast. And it's all done pretty quickly with this brush pen. I feel very confident with the line, so I know that I can get a strong, thin, thick line, as if I was just dipping it into India ink. That's what's so good about it. For many years, I just would have used India ink with a brush and done the same type of thing. But with the brush pen, and it is waterproof, I can get to this stage, and you can see I'm kind of figuring out where to go with this. How much more do I necessarily need to do? Because the color part is where it's really going to pop for some of the other things here. Getting set at this point to clean it up a little bit with my kneaded eraser. And so this is looking pretty good here. Got to be careful if any ink is wet still. Don't want to smear it, especially on that face. My big fear always, because I'm working very quickly. Keep touching down. Kneaded erasers. Got to have some. Doesn't hurt the surface. Pulls up that.
Let's take a quick look at one of the books that I do. Remember, I am a working cartoonist, and I would like everybody to take a look at some of the stuff that I do. And this is Shock. This is a graphic novel that I've just finished off. It's about 170 pages, I think, of the idea of there used to be, in the early parts of television, we used to have every town would play horror films, and they would have a specific person, an actor, who would host these creature double features and everything. I grew up around the Philadelphia area, so we had a Dr. Shock. There were multiple Dr. Shocks across the country. But what they would do is they would show the things. They would have little, they would do all kinds of magic and jokes and things. So I imagined if there really was a ghoulish man called Dr. Shock and what his life would have been like outside of the show. So it's kind of a dark comedy, but lots of ideas from the 70s and all kinds of looks back on some of those things. It's a fun read, and you can find it on my Amazon page. And I think a lot of people would enjoy seeing some of the characters that they grew up with, the black and white era. So take a look for it.
Okay, here we are back at Baltimore Comic Con. And I'm just cleaning up this image, getting ready to go to my watercolors, my basic. These are just kind of that moist color, simple pan there, and just use a nice round brush. I literally fill up a plastic bottle of water, and I just bring them over. Now I want to try to kind of set myself up with some of the colors. I feel like most of the time the first layer is pretty light, so I want to make sure I'm covering up this book. Remember, it's a beautiful book from this gentleman that wanted to sketch. So I'm going to make sure if I keep my colors close and I'm protecting it. That's my sketch list for the day. So I'm making my way through. So again, just kind of going in, soft colors, some flesh, some cartoony flesh to begin with. Just a white with a touch of red, touch of yellow. And I just kind of lay it in there. It doesn't have a lot of skin exposed with this crazy image of a costume. So with this guy, though, they really focused on complements for this one. So it's the red of the, I guess, tunic or his shirt would be first. And you can see I'm not trying to get anything that's too dark at this point. I want to keep everything nice and light. So when you're doing watercolor like this, trying to focus in on where that highlight is, and you can see I leave a pretty nice value there at the beginning, and then I have plenty of opportunity to go in there with a little dark to pop it a little bit. But variety, even with this type of a sketch, really can add so much to the final product. I keep checking to make sure that this specific uniform is correct, because you can't believe it sometimes. So I'm like, all right, I better get some of this yellow in there. All the colors are in this one. So there's just certain parts of it. I'm just keep checking, and if I'm using a color, I tend to put it into a lot of parts around, especially if I have that ring that I want to have kind of exploding with power eventually. So I'm just adding this yellow, and then I'm like, all right, I'm going to move over to, believe it or not, he's got a blue part of this cape. Right, trying to get that in. These are not super bright values. For this kind of a character, I guess I could have kept it lighter, but I kind of like the deepness of that color those colors together, it's just too much. I don't know. Like maybe for the printed parts, that it wouldn't have been such a big deal to have these kind of colors to get together. And I just want it to be a big rainbow. So to have them a little diluted at this early stage, you can see I'm just kind of laying that in. But the watercolor that's in this specific paper is getting soaked up nice and quickly. And it's drying almost immediately when I'm putting this down. So it is a wet on dry technique. A lot of watercolors are done with, you'll wet the paper first and then go in with your color. But for this, I'm just kind of moving in, wet on dry, keeping that. You can see I keep a highlight up there on the front, trying to keep it consistent throughout the whole character. Starting to look at it, I'm like, hey, I'm going to pull some of this green in there. Eventually, I tend to have most of the colors touched in there somehow, even if it's a blue cape with a little touch of green with it. But this whole costume, all over the place. But in some ways, it all works because they had such great sense of color with a lot of these characters that I would be, they all work. And when I see them printed, I'm just like, you see some of those early issues from DC Comics when they would do the colors. They were just masters at color combinations. But in the long run, you see a lot of those reds and green will always go together, those complements. So again, I'm adding all throughout this background a sense of drama and atmosphere, and especially with a powerful character like a Green Lantern, as insane as his costume may look, you still want him to seem pretty like powerful guy, like you have to worry about this guy. So again, the paper is really holding on to this color. When you're at the conventions, sometimes people, if I have to draw on somebody else's paper, I'm never sure what I'm going to get. But this is like probably an acid-free, cold pressed sketchbook that you could easily buy at most art stores. And it's got nice quality. It's definitely a heavier bond than an 80 point that I'm using, or an 80 pound that is. So again, here I am. I'm starting to add some of the colors into the other parts. Into that flesh, add a little blue, which I tend to do. Cool that down a little bit. Lots of little parts, contrast, value, variety, everything you need, all those elements and principles that you need for your colors. Like how this is going. Again, this is usually the part where I'm like, okay, here are my flats. Now I'm going to start considering getting in there and beginning with some of the black when I have a character like this. Just touch-ups here. I consider these the flats. So now it's time to kind of get aggressive with this thing. And at the end of a lot of these kind of sketches, I'll go in there with some black. So with the character, I want to see what's on that brush first. Get a little splatter effect. That's always the fun part. And again, is there anything better in the whole world than to just be able to go in and do this kind of an image? Loose, changes that whole, when you go in there with that dark, you can really change the overall feeling of this piece. A little frenetic, but again, you have to keep in your head, at least I try to, is that in the end, does it just seem to be together? How much information do you need when you're looking at an image like this? Do I need to have any more detail? Sometimes I just want to end it and just have it half finished or something. Like some people may think, well, I could go back in there with some detail. but you could lose a lot of that just powerful feel by the end of it. And when you sit back from it, I think there is some real enjoyment that I get to see how little you need to do to deal with a character like this. And because it's my style, I do want people to recognize that there are some people who have done an amazing job with this character. But I kind of like this idea where, what am I going to bring to it, no matter who the character is. So I'm getting close here. I'm looking at it. I'm trying to see if is there anything more that needs to be done. Still lots of little pieces of contrast. Am I seeing enough of the cape? Should I play around with that a little bit? The focus really is on his face and that hand and how it's kind of coming off. So I usually go and I just touch out around those areas. I don't want to lose any of that. I liked the green shine inside that circle. Now I'm just like staying on the outside. No interest with playing around with almost anything else. Almost all finished. I like that texture. What else can you get out of that? Move on to the end of it. Yeah. That's the fun of it, right? All right, so I think we've come down to the end of it. A quick little look. So thanks. So like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time